Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 5, Amritsar to Nagpur. 1919 to 1921. Armistice brought not peace, but the sword of harsh repression and bitter dissolution to India. Martial law, Defense of India Acts, passed in 1915, had suspended civil liberties and all legal due process throughout the war, allowing for the government of India to arrest, detain, intern, or expel any Indian without trial, warrant, or stated cause. The Allied victory was, naturally, expected to restore all such rights and legal safeguards. Such was not the case, however, for an ominous report written by the Government Sedition Committee, chaired by King's Bench Justice Sir Sidney Rowlatt, had just been published recommending immediate extension of the Criminal Law Emergency Powers Act for at least 6 months. Such was the very first bill introduced to the post-war Central Legislative Council. It soon came to be known and hated throughout India as the Black or Rowlatt Act. This was a wrong remedy for the disease, the revolutionary crimes, warned the Honorable Mr. Jinnah, as Rowlatt's bill was tabled on 6th February 1919. To substitute the executive for the judicial will lead to the abuse of these vast powers. There was no precedent or parallel in the legal history of any civilized country to the enactment of such laws. This was the inopportune moment for this legislation, as high hopes about momentous reforms had been raised. If these measures were passed, they will create unprecedented discontent, agitation, and will have the most disastrous effect upon the relations between the government and the people. His warnings fell on deaf ears. Chelmsford, Rowlatt, and the others were determined to steam full ahead, despite the unanimous opposition of all 22 Indian members on the council. There were 34 official members willing to rubber stamp the Black Act that was passed into law in March 1919. By passing this bill, Jinnah wrote Chelmsford a few days later from his Malabar Hill house, to which he had returned as soon as the vote was announced. Your Excellency's government have actively negatived every argument they advanced. But a year ago, when they appealed to India for help at the War Conference and have ruthlessly trampled upon the principles for which Great Britain avowedly fought the war, the fundamental principles of justice have been uprooted and the constitutional rights of the people have been violated at a time when there is no real danger to the state by an over-fretful and incompetent bureaucracy, which is neither responsible to the people nor in touch with the real public opinion. I, therefore, as a protest against the passing of the bill and the manner in which it was passed, tender my resignation, for I feel that under the prevailing conditions, I can be of no use to my people in the council, nor consistently with one's self-respect is cooperation possible with a government that shows such utter disregard for the opinion of the representatives of the people in the council chamber and for the feelings and sentiments of the people outside. In my opinion, a government that passes or sanctions such law in times of peace forfeits its claim to be called a civilized government, and I still hope that the Secretary of State for India, Mr. Montagu, will advise His Majesty to signify his disallowance to this Black Act. The resignation, further attesting to Jinnah's courageous national leadership at this time, made no impact on Chelmsford, while Montagu's own influence in London continued to deteriorate. Jinnah had no way of knowing on how important a Secretary of State he pinned his hopes for in India's future, and decided to sail for London to seek to persuade his faltering friend to override the government of India. Ruthie was pregnant, and though their love would never be as strong again, and the aftermath of the war proved so politically frustrating, the future never seemed as promising to both of them as it did that winter at the start of 1919. The Muslim League had appointed Jinnah to lead a deputation to Prime Minister Lloyd George that year to plead for at least one Muslim delegate to the forthcoming Paris Peace Conference. Most Indian Muslims felt, as League President A.K. Fazlul Haq put it, that Muslim countries are now the prey of the land-grabbing propensities of Christian nations, in spite of the solemn pledges given by these very nations that the world war was being fought for the protection of the rights of the small and defenseless minorities. Sir Satyendra P. Sinha and the Maharaja of Ghana had been appointed to represent India at the Imperial War Conference in 1917, but since neither was Muslim, the League feared that Islamic interests were being shortchanged or ignored. With the Ali brothers and other popular Khilafat leaders, including Delhi's scholarly devout Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, 1887 to 1958, still under detention without specified charges, Muslims felt more intensely than ever a sense of communal alarm and second-class subjectship under the British rule. Khilafatists feared that British wartime pledges and promises to protect Islam's holy places would be broken, now that Turkey was a defeated enemy power at the mercy of Christian victor states, determined to crush it for all time. The Jinnahs reached London in May and rented a flat near Regent's Park. Friends visited them there, including Bombay's Diwan Chaman Lal, who recalled Jinnah's uninhibited laughter when telling a funny story, which was often in the category of a parable. One evening in mid-August, Jinnah took Ruthie to the theatre, but they were obliged to leave their box hurriedly. Their only child, a daughter named Dina, was born in London shortly past midnight on August 14-15, 1919. Oddly enough, precisely 28 years to the day, and an hour before the birth of Jinnah's other offspring, Pakistan. Jinnah's mission for the League proved less successful. However, for though he presented the Muslim case vigorously to Lloyd George, the Prime Minister granted him no satisfaction. Montagu and Buchanan alone represented India at Versailles, where Britain and France formally assumed their protectorate mandates over Iraq, Palestine, Transjordan, Syria, and Lebanon, carved out of the dismembered Ottoman Empire. Jinnah must have hoped for an invitation to attend the peace conference himself, especially since he had come so far and was the delegate of the Muslim League. But the distrust, hatred, and suspicion of him, so recently expressed by Chelmsford, Wellington, and other leading experts on India sufficed to keep Britain's cabinet cold to his overtures. More doors remained closed than open to him this time round. Bombay's new governor, George Lloyd, did his best to poison Montagu's mind against Jinnah, writing of him that June as fair of speech and black of heart, a real irreconcilable, and of all the agitators, the only one who has consistently said one thing and gone straight away and done the other. There were fewer smiles on those robust London faces he met, as Whitehall closed ranks behind Simla, Delhi, and Bombay. He had, after all, resigned his honourable position. Best not to encourage that sort. Since April, moreover, non cooperation and violence had spread across India like brush fire. In the wake of Anti Rowlatt Act, mass protests, and British massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, Gandhi chose April 6, 1919 as the first sacred day of a nationwide business strike, Hartal, to protest the Black Acts, which he urged his Yagra followers to refuse civilly to obey. It was a totally non violent day, but a week later, on April 13, 1919, Amritsar, nectar of immortality, a city sacred to the Sikhs of the Punjab, was transformed shortly before sundown into India's first national urban shrine. Two of Gandhi's lieutenants had been arrested a few days earlier and deported, thus stirring up a protest march towards the British Commissioner's bungalow in the cantonment. Several soldiers panicked and opened fire, killing a few marchers and turning the peaceful crowd into a raging mob bent on retaliation. They burned British banks and attacked a few English women, as well as Englishmen, in Amritsar's old city. British brigadier and his force were called in to restore order. The general banned all public meetings. On April 13th, and when he learned of a meeting of thousands taking place inside Jallianwala Bagh, the garden, he drove to that almost totally enclosed site with some of his troops, ordering them to open fire without uttering a word of warning to the peaceful assembled crowd inside. It was a Sunday, a Hindu festival holiday. The crowd, mostly villagers, had come to the city to celebrate. The soldiers fired 1650 rounds of live ammunition at point blank range for 10 minutes at the terror stricken human targets who found no exits from that nightmare in the garden, leaving some 400 Indians dead and over 1200 wounded. The general and his troops beat a hasty retreat as the sun set on the bloodiest massacre in British Indian history, which Chelmsford later termed an error of judgment. India has got to keep her head cool at this most critical moment, Jinnah advised his readers in an interview, the Bombay Chronicle, published on his return home in mid November 1919. Unless at the next session of the Congress in December, a thoughtful program is laid down by our leaders and accepted by the people, an incalculable amount of harm would be done to our cause. Jinnah still felt confident that Mr. Montagu will not fail us, but termed Chelmsford's administration a failure and argued that the sooner he is recalled, the better for all concerned. As to the Prime Minister's promises on behalf of poor Turkey, he called those a scrap of paper and did not believe the Allies stood ready to concede self-determination and independence to Arab states. He was, however, more optimistic about India, envisioning a true renaissance through education, commercial, industrial, and technical progress and growth, and a nationalized military policy. Asked if he had any message to the people as the Amritsar Congress was approaching, Jinnah replied, "The attitude of the Congress will have to depend upon the reform bill, which I think will be passed before the mid of December." Jinnah had written Gandhi from London in June, asking what he thought of Montagu's bill then in Parliament. And Gandhi replied, "I cannot say anything about the reforms bill. I have hardly studied it. My preoccupation is Rowlatt legislation. Our reforms will be practically worthless if we cannot repeal Rowlatt legislation. And as I can imagine, no form of resistance to the government than civil disobedience. I propose, God willing, to resume it next week. I have taken all precautions that are humanly possible to take against recrudescence of violence." It epitomized their different approaches to political process. Jinnah still relying upon moderate legislative change, Gandhi preoccupied with civil disobedience. The vectors of their widely divergent paths led them ever further apart. If India were to send her real representatives, say half a dozen, who will carry on propaganda work there in London, backed up by a substantial financial help and public opinion, Jinnah suggested in his Bombay Chronicle interview, a great deal can be done, but it must be a continual and permanently established institution carried on by men not only who go there for a few months but permanently settled. Was he hoping for such a change himself? He was now a father after all, and had to plan for his daughter's future as well as his young wife's. India was less secure than usual, less safe a land to raise a family in than it had been since the terrible war of 1857 to 1858. The influenza epidemic alone had claimed more than 6 million lives since 1918, and with the frontier rumbling, the Punjab bleeding, and the rest of the land poised on the verge of Satyagraha, prospects for the immediate future seemed dismal. Nor had Ruthie's father relented, continuing to refuse to acknowledge them socially, despite the birth of his granddaughter. So the lure of London remained, growing more romantic perhaps as its permanent realization became less plausible. Jinnah's Bombay practice continued to prosper, demanding and receiving more and more of his time and attention, evenings as well as days, and often 7 days a week. The law was an exacting mistress, as Ruthie soon learned. What little free time was left to him, politics consumed. Mercurial, dashing, impulsive, and lovely, lonely young Ruthie found herself daily with more time than she could possibly devise ways to spend. The long awaited Montague reforms were passed into law as the Government of India Act on December 23, 1919, the day of King Emperor George V's royal proclamation, granting amnesty to all political prisoners. It was His Majesty's earnest desire at this time that, so far as possible, any trace of bitterness between my people and those who are responsible for my government should be obliterated. But the new act fell far short of that mark. Had it come a year earlier, perhaps it would have sufficed to satisfy expectations aroused by the war, though it did provide some measure of provincial responsibility to the elected representatives of India by transferring certain departments and their revenues to popular control, while reserving other more important matters to official hands. This newly devised technique of half and half rule, called diarchy, was Britain's formula for devolving political power by successive stages to India. The Central Legislative Council was greatly enlarged into a bicameral mini parliament with an elective majority lower house to be called the Legislative Assembly. The expense of the Secretary of State for India's salary and those of his assistants was taken off India's budget and transferred to Parliament, as Congress and the League demanded. A public service commission was to be established in India, thanks to which simultaneous recruitment to the coveted civil services would begin in New Delhi as well as in London by 1923. Finally, the Act provided for further statutory inquiry into the working of the system of government, the growth of education, and the development of representative institutions in British India, as to whether and to what extent it is desirable to establish the principle of responsible government after 10 years. Had these come before the Rowlatt Act and Amritsar, Such constitutional concessions would surely have sounded generous and have been more warmly welcomed throughout India. Both Congress and the Muslim League held annual meetings in Amritsar in 1919. Hindu-Muslim unity was seen by the League to be secret of success, not just of the newly proposed reforms but of all work done by Indians at home and abroad. And thanks to the Congress League Compact of 1916, the major political obstacle to such unity had been resolved. The Ali brothers appeared before the Amritsar League to a standing ovation and reverberating chorus of joy. Muhammad Ali assured his joyously tearful audience that there was no government but the government of God. Jinnah was elected to preside over the League for the following year. Jinnah called a special meeting of the Muslim League that September in Calcutta, where Congress met as well in emergency session to consider the radical change of political posture caused not only by announced Allied peace terms but also by harsh, callous British reactions to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and published reports of its atrocious aftermath throughout the Punjab. We have met here principally to consider the situation that has arisen owing to the studied and persistent policy of the government since the signing of the armistice. First came the Rowlatt Bill, accompanied by the Punjab atrocities, and then came the spoliation of the Ottoman Empire and the Khilafat. The one attacks our liberty, the other our faith. Now, every country has two principal and vital functions to perform. One to assert its voice in international policy, and the other to maintain internally the highest ideals of justice and humanity. But one must have one's own administration in one's own hands to carry it on to one's own satisfaction. As we stand in matters international, notwithstanding the unanimous opinion of the Mussulmans and in breach of the Prime Minister's solemn pledges, unchivalrous and outrageous terms have been imposed upon Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire has served for plunder and broken up by allies under the guise of mandates. This, thank God, has at last convinced us once and for all that we can no longer abide our trust either in the government of India or in the government of His Majesty the King of England to represent India in matters international. And now let us turn to Punjab. That Star Chamber legislation, named after the notorious chairman of the Rowlatt Committee, was launched by the government of Lord Chelmsford, and it resulted in those celebrated crimes, which neither the words of men nor the tears of women can wash away. An error of judgment, they call it. If that is the last word, I agree with them. An error of judgment it is, and they shall have to pay for it, if not today, then tomorrow. One thing there is which is indisputable, and that is that this government must go and give place to a completely responsible government. Meetings of the Congress and Muslim League will not affect this. We shall have to think out some course more effective than passing resolutions of disapproval to be forwarded to the Secretary of State for India. And we shall surely find a way, even as France and Italy did, and the newborn Egypt has. We are not going to rest content until we have attained the fullest political freedom in our own country. Mr. Gandhi has placed his program of non-cooperation, supported by the authority of the Khilafat Conference, before the country. It is now for you to consider whether or not you approve of its principle, and approving of its principle, whether or not you approve of its details. The operations of this scheme will strike at the individual in each of you, and therefore it rests with you alone to measure your strength and to weigh the pros and the cons of the questions before you arrive at a decision. But once you have decided to march, let there be no retreat under any circumstances.